Good morning, and thank you for attending today. My name is Martin Diamond. I work for the private sector housing team at Cornwall Council. The purpose of this meeting and webinar really is to raise awareness of damp and mould growth and the health impacts it has on people. This is primarily aimed at landlords and tenants, but some of the information will also be useful for homeowners and also for social housing tenants and indeed all occupiers. There'll be some useful tips along the way, which hopefully people will be able to utilise. And what we will cover today, so we're going to be looking at what causes damp and condensation and mould in people's homes, why the mould is harmful to health, what actions could or should be taken to prevent or remove mould, and what support is available to landlords, tenants and homeowners. And at the end of the presentation, we will have we will start to answer the questions. On that, I would like to hand over to Ruth.
Thank you, Martin. I'm Ruth Clark. I'm Chair of Cornwall Residential Landlords Association. You'll hear more about us later, and you'll be fed up with my voice long before then. Damp is a build-up of moisture in a property. I think we all know that. There's various causes. The penetrating damp, which is anything which comes from the outside, could be through a roof, could be a ceiling, could be through the floor, even through a wall. So when you're doing your inspections of a property, look out for damage into staining, deterioration of walls, damage to plaster. You'll see blistering, disintegration, salting, and possibly rotting skirting boards or floor timbers. Of course, these can also be caused by other factors, such as rising damp, and that's mostly caused by damaged or missing damp-proof courses. If you've got a high ground level, it may be above the damp-proof course, and so you get the rising damp through that. If there's inadequate ventilation, of course, that's going to cause more problems, and plumbing leaks, particularly the pipes that pass below flooring, faulty drainage systems. So look out for tide marks, again, damp patches, peeling wallpaper, rotting skirting boards, black mould, musty odour, a formation of white deposits, bubbling or flaking plaster. And both the penetrating and rising damp are maintenance issues which landlords need to watch out for. We'll be talking about condensation a lot, so I won't go into that now. Hygroscopic damp is generally where water has been absorbed by salts on the wall. This can be from the use of bleach or bleach-based products used to clean mould up. The traumatic damp is building defects, again, flooding, burst pipes, overflowing sinks or bars. So not necessarily a landlord issue, but a problem that needs to be addressed quickly. And construction moisture is basically as above with the penetrating and rising damp. So the average adult gives out between 30 and 70 grams of moisture each day. So obviously the more people or pets in a room, the more moisture there is. Water droplets in the air become condensation when hitting a cold surface. The warmer the air in the room, the more moisture it holds and the more condensation on cold surfaces. Main problems are lack of heating and ventilation. The cost of living crisis means many more people are having problems heating their homes and only heating one room. The warm air from that one room goes quickly to colder air rooms and condenses. So try to keep, if you can, heating consistent, or at least not let rooms get cold. Landlords may want to investigate installing a positive input ventilation system, commonly called PIV, preferably one with a humidity sensor. And for most properties, this is a better solution than a dehumidifier. Not for all properties, but for most. A PIV circulates the air, and using one with a heating element will stop cold drafts. Common complaint amongst people who have them. Wet, damp clothes drying. If you can, keep the wet or damp clothes drying in a bathroom. Keep the door shut, keep the fan on, and let all the condensation out. Don't let it go into your living area. If you have no option other than to dry your clothes indoors, you may want to consider one of the heated dryers. We live in a mobile home, and we have one of these tall areas with a plastic cover, and that actually keeps all the condensation in and dries your clothes, with the added advantage of heating the room. Try to keep properties dry, try to keep the heating adequate throughout the property, but you may want to raise it in the room where you're spending most of your life. If you are heating the room, make sure you're comfortable. That's a different heat depending on your lifestyle. So the mould is a big problem at the moment, and it's caused from spores forming in the condensation and growing into black or white mould. Too much water vapour can be a problem, obviously. When you're using the kitchen or the bathroom, please try to keep that room's door closed. Sorry about that. Then you've got all the steam escaping would always be in that one room. If you're cooking, cover your cooking pots. And if you have a fan in the kitchen or in the bathroom, use it, or perhaps better still, open the window slightly. An interesting point which came to my attention is if you have a bath, if you put the cold water in first, less steam is created than adding cold water to hot water. The health impacts obviously going to be for those with compromised immune systems. It could be that they have heart conditions, it could be someone's pregnant, it could be an older person, it could be someone with mobility issues, it could be someone with any type of condition, heart condition, anything which just reduces your ability to resist infection. People with a mental health condition, all of these people are vulnerable, and they will see, obviously, I think we're going to say headaches, fever, sneezing, coughing, but also skin rashes, asthma attacks, shortness of breath, insomnia and fatigue. We don't often think about insomnia and fatigue being associated with mould, but it is, and nausea. And you have what's called a sick building syndrome, and that's just a term used to describe a group of symptoms that people experience when in building, any building. I think we've all sort of, when we've worked in offices, we've sort of said there's, when we're in the office, it's not well, is it the air being circulated from one to another? It can be this sick building syndrome. But please keep yourself warm, keep yourself safe. So what actions should you be taking? Landlords, you need to inspect your properties regularly. It's no good saying, well, I've had a tenant in here 6 years and I've never checked. How do you know that the heating, the insulation is still good? So periodic inspections. Remember to give the tenant a minimum of 24 hours notice before you go in, and they can refuse you entry. If they do, what's the problem? Schedule your maintenance. If you've got ready scheduled maintenance, you should be keeping on top of most things. It's not going to keep on top of everything, we all know that. Establish the source of any problem, identify the issues, work out exactly what works are required and agree timescales, and keep your tenant in the loop. If you've got an open communication with your tenant, they will confirm to you if there's a problem. But whatever happens, when you visit a property, when you talk to your tenant and you agree works, keep this communication in writing, not in a text message, not in a WhatsApp, by email or by letter. Your tenancy agreement will tell you whether you can use email or not, but it's got to be using the notice as agreed in the tenancy agreement. Never leave a tenant with a damp and mould problem. It's got to be addressed quickly. I think we all remember the terrible case of the young boy who died in social housing because of the amount of mould in his house. And it's actually quite interesting. Today I was listening to the radio talking about the number of children who died in social housing, and quite often mould and damp are an issue. If you're a member or a resident of social housing complex, make sure you keep that landlord in the loop as well. It's not just private landlords who need to be kept in the loop. Write to your landlord, tell them what the problem is. If they don't respond, for social landlords, there is an ombudsman service. As I said, if you've got a problem, first thing to do is to tell your landlord and to clean the area. If you clean it when it's a small patch of mould, it doesn't get to develop to something major. If you can keep the air drier, for example, covering pans, closing doors, then it's going to help. And if you can ventilate the room, that's whether you've got a window open, if you've got a trickle vent, if you've got fans, keep some form of air circulation, and it will help. If there is a big problem in one room, try a dehumidifier. They aren't expensive, and they aren't expensive to run. And of course, keep yourself and your property warm. Try to keep your heating at a minimum of 18 degrees for the living room and 16 degrees for bedrooms. Not always possible, but support may be available. Do not do, as you so often see, heat the room up. It's lovely and warm. I'm too hot. I'm going to turn the fire off. Oh, I'm cold. Put it back on again. That's just wasting your money. Find out what is a comfortable temperature for you and your lifestyle and the lifestyle of everyone else in your property, and try to keep to that. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruth.
Yes, thanks everybody. I'm Anthony Ball. I'm an advanced public health practitioner with Cornwall Council. And I'm going to cover a couple of issues here in terms of Community Energy Plus and winter wellbeing and what we're doing. So Ruth has helpfully highlighted some of the health issues that are caused by damp and homes with that are cold and with condensation. And I'll just sort of reiterate some of those issues that basically damp homes cause ill health and make an existing health condition worse. So that's what we're dealing with, and we've all heard recently the amount of pressure our local NHS is under, with critical care, critical incidents being declared. So we can see what issues this is causing. And we need to tackle our housing stock to make ourselves healthier. So as Ruth has highlighted, advice and information does exist. So we do have a winter wellbeing guide that I'll put in the chat later on. And we do work very closely with the NHS, with our winter wellbeing partners. And the NHS are doing some Winter for Wellbeing 2025 public events coming up in the next few weeks. And there is also online help as well. So when we sort of say some of the health conditions, then again, Ruth has highlighted quite a few of them, but you've got other issues in terms of high blood pressure, common colds to heart attacks and pneumonia. It does, as Ruth highlighted, cause social isolation issues, stress, sleep deprivation, insomnia, but also absence from work. So then it starts affecting your ability to pay for your energy if you're going to lose your job, which then leads to causing the damp and mold in the first place, or trying to work out a way to deal with it. And also, if you've already got an existing health condition, a damp and moldy home is really, really bad. And what we also find is if you've already got a condition like that, then you're more likely to be admitted to hospital. And one of the worst things we can do then is to send you back home to that unhealthy home to, strangely enough, readmit you to hospital later because we haven't dealt with the issue at source. And if you've got respiratory issues, all these things make it so much more hard to deal with. It affects all ages. In the past, we always tend to think this was older people and young people that are particularly affected, but really these days, because of cost of living issues, it does affect all ages, and we need to bear that in mind when we're trying to tackle this issue. Ultimately, we want people to live healthier lives for longer, but cold and damp and homes with condensation are making that harder for us to do, but they are key to tackling the issue in terms of health and housing. We do have other tools and other information available. So if you need help turning heating on at the moment, there is something called the Household Support Fund that again can be accessed through our Winter Wellbeing partner, Community Energy Plus. There's advice and information, as I've already said, through the Winter Wellbeing guides. And then we're also piloting a number of measures at the moment called a damp and mould toolkit, which we're piloting with about 4 groups of professionals, including the NHS partners, to sort of identify properties where they're going in and can see how bad the damp and mould is. And instead of wondering what to do with that, we're making it easier for them to refer them to us to then tackle those particular properties, whether they're private landlords, social landlords, or in the owner-occupied sector. We've also made it easier for GPs to support their patients. So they again have a sort of quick referral system, so they can flag up when a property or a patient is coming to them with consistent health issues, and the tenant or the resident is flagging up that it's the house causing those issues for them. So I think ultimately, I think it's a case of we have to work together more effectively, which is what we're doing, but we do need to tackle damp and mould, and events such as this are really important to tackle that. I'll hand back to Ruth then, I think.
Thank you, Anthony. CRLA, Cornwall Residential Landlords Association, is a an association which is formed by landlords, and we represent, we inform and we advise landlords with properties in Cornwall. Now this includes advice sheets, it includes links to the various documentation you require for your tenancy agreement, all the way through from how do I set up a tenancy through to the very end. We have for our members over 50 individual advice sheets, which do include a couple of advice sheets on damp and mould, and which can be shared with your tenants. And we have nearly 100 items which can be downloaded towards the tenancy agreements. Always here when you want us.
Thank you very much. Just remind everybody, my name is Martin Diamond. I have delivered the Cornwall Responsible Landlord Scheme with my colleague Keith, mainly for the last few years. It is essentially a free registration scheme where responsible landlords can engage with private sector housing at Cornwall Council for guidance and advice about issues they have, and also compliance with existing and new legislation as it comes through. The scheme has partners which support our work in this area. Our partners are Ruth from the Cornwall Residential Landlords Association, the South West Landlords Association, Property Mark, previously Arla. Yes, so that's what the scheme does. Sorry, I will just mention that we are producing a webinar. The next webinar will be about the Cornwall Responsible Landlord Scheme and including information about the Renters' Rights Bill. Other support available, we suggest you get advice from damp specialists where it's not clear what the cause of an issue is in the property that you let. And there's also support available from private sector housing. I think in the question someone's touched on a leaflet, guidance leaflet we've got, and there is advice about there trying to resolve issues with your landlords as well.
So this particular case study here just sort of shows some of the issues we face in terms of our housing stock. So here you've got a landlord, if you like, sort of trying to do the right thing. They've got a holiday let property and they've let it for a long time, but they've decided to switch it back to sort of 12-month permanent use. So you think that's a good thing. That's something, you know, we would all be campaigning for, to get properties back into use and for the long term. But what we actually found was by living in the property for 12 months, damp and mold became more apparent. And it was affecting the health of the children. Mold was present on the walls. It was affecting the bedding. It's affecting all their clothing, so everything starts smelling. So it's all very sort of uncomfortable for the family living in the property. The GP was sort of made aware of this issue and sort of flagged up their concerns because a 4-year-old child was starting to get affected with respiratory issues. And as we've sort of heard earlier on, in social housing in the north of the country, then children have died because of persistent damp and mold and persistent respiratory issues. So we know it's really, really serious. But as we all know, there's a huge housing shortage in Cornwall and in much of the country, and tenants understandably are worried about if they push their issues too far, the landlord may choose to evict them because they might think, oh well, I can get somebody else in who will be more compliant, and they don't want to lose all their social connections, where they go to school, where they can work. They don't want to disrupt things. So it can be a delicate relationship. But here, the landlord and the tenants were communicating in the way that Ruth was outlining, and the landlord was willing to improve the property to make it far more comfortable and sort of reduce the damp and mold. Now, in the winter wellbeing, through our partner Community Energy Plus that we use for all these services and fund them accordingly, they were able to install, with the landlord's permission, a PIV system, which sort of started circulating the air in the loft to reduce the effect of damp, mold and condensation in the loft. We've also used several household support fund payments to sort of make sure they can actually afford to turn the heating on, because of cost of living. Then if you're going to live in a property and you're going to keep it cold and not turn the heating on, it's going to add to the damp and mold and condensation. So we use those funds, and because of that, landlord's happy, tenants are happy, respiratory issues are reduced for the child, and it sort of shows by working together and sort of tackling the issue at source and being open with each other in terms of landlord and the tenant, then we can make a big difference to households. And this is just one example that shows what can be done. And it's really important to sort of highlight these to see these are examples. This is how we work together and work together to get a better solution. You can look on Cornwall Council's website for general information about Household Support Fund. But in terms of energy and help with energy issues, then please go to Community Energy Plus's website, and the Winter Wellbeing Guide that I put in the chat is also linked to there. And again, if you've got any specific issues that you're not sure how to resolve, I think that there was the one in the chat about Eco4, then please email the Public Health Desk email, because we do operate schemes around Eco4 and so-called local authority flexible eligibility. Bit of a mouthful, but that's basically Eco4. And we do a lot of work in trying to ensure grants come into the council and are used to upgrade housing in the private sector. So we can work together very effectively to sort of change those issues and to improve the properties. And to put it in some context, over the last 3 years, we've improved about 819 homes on average each year. So getting on for 2,500. So we do a lot of work. We are making a difference, but unfortunately, with cost of living and fuel poverty, we are facing a very challenging situation because fuel poverty is far worse than it was 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. Right, so as you can see on the screen, we've got links there for the Cornwall Residential Landlords Association, the Cornwall Responsible Landlord Scheme, and links to our website and guides, and also the government guidance, and the Ombudsman service for currently for social housing tenants. Okay, so I would thank everybody again for attending. Thank you, Ruth, for delivering the presentation and everyone's input. Laura, should we look at some questions, please?
Yes, thank you, Martin. So I'm going to go right to the top and we'll go through each question one by one. Just bear with me. So what sort of properties is a positive input ventilation system not suitable for? So Nicole, I'm going to go to you. You did answer a little bit in the chat, but I was wondering if you could clarify that.
Hi, yeah, I think someone's actually answered that quite well, but generally the PIV system is put in the loft. So obviously if you don't have a loft space, that's a bit of an issue. And then there's a diffuser that sits on the landing and pushes the air through the house. So it can be difficult if you're in a small flat on one floor with no loft space or a bungalow, but somebody's helpfully put in there a system that has actually been developed for flats. So it's worth having a look at the link in the chat.
Thanks, Nicole. So the next question was best way to clean mould and what are the best products to use to clean mould, please? So Ruth, potentially yourself, and anyone else that wants to jump in.
Right. An anti-fungicidal cleaner is the best way to clean off the stain. Just sort of washing up liquid works quite well generally. Don't, if you can avoid it, use a bleach or a bleach-based product, or if you do, clean it off well afterwards, because there are salts in a bleach. It's an ammonia salt, and as I think I mentioned, where you have salts, you will get mould. Using a bleach will clean it up, but it's only a temporary fix.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. Next questions, there was some around the damp and mould specific guide to provide to tenants. So Keith, I don't know if you wanted to mention about the private sector housing guide.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Keith Anstis and I'm a private sector and housing officer in the private sector team. Yeah, we've got a simple guide on our website that does, excuse me, that does explain ways to help prevent mould. That is very useful to read through and just see if that helps with any potential problem that you've got. But it's available on our website, so do look to find it. But I think someone mentioned that they're going to add that to the chat or to the meeting after.
Thanks, Keith. Anthony, did you want to mention a bit more about the Winter Wellbeing Guide? Because I know you linked to that.
Yes, I've just put it in the chat there. The Winter Wellbeing Guide we've done for about the last 12, 13 years, and it's about a sort of 30, 40 page, well, no, probably actually 50 page guide there, which focuses on how to keep yourself warm, safe, secure and sort of healthy during the winter. So it links all the health information. Key for health, key is obviously getting all your jabs done and up to date. But obviously a lot of the housing information is in there as well about why to stay warm, how to stay warm, and what you can do to make your home warmer as well. So it's a comprehensive pack produced by the Winter Wellbeing Partnership. That's about 30 organisations, and is very successful. And there are printed copies, because we know not everybody's online. So there's printed copies available in a lot of health buildings, libraries, council buildings, job centres, town and parish councils, all around the county. And if anyone's the Isles of Scilly on the call, then we do have a different guide for the Isles of Scilly, because they've got more specific and tailored services.
Thanks, Anthony. So next question, to support landlords along with having the correct vent strategy, would you recommend covering stain block or replacing the plaster in affected area with a breathable plaster? Who's best placed to answer that question?
I can try and answer that, Laura. I mean, basically, I would think you really need to establish what the cause is prior to carrying out any remedial works. And it also depends on the type of structure. Some structures fare better with a breathable plaster, and some it would have little effect because of the nature of the construction. At this point, I think if you have a difficulty with a problem, then that's where you ought to get some advice, perhaps from a specialist. And I think that came up as one of the questions, Laura. And my answer to that would be to, if you don't have an existing relationship with a contractor that you can trust, then I would suggest going through trading standards. We do have a approved contractors list to give some assurance to people that these companies have carried out satisfactory work to a standard in the past.
Okay, thank you. Any tips on how to access reputable Eco4 style schemes for insulation and heating without ending up with cowboy salesmen? Anthony?
I put a link to that in the chat as well. But we as I said, we operate something called Eco4 LA Flex. We have a list of about 30 or 40 installers. We don't endorse any of them, but they are generally reputable. And very recently, last week, the government were highlighting, I think they've suspended about 39 installers because of a specific issue to solid wall insulation and internal wall insulation. But I would advise you to go to that list first and then sort of see if that's a way of helping you, because then you will see some installers on there that we are using, but as I say, we do not officially recommend or endorse any of them.
Okay, thank you. What sort of cost are you looking at to have a PIV installed?
I think this is how long is a piece of string. It really depends on your property. They can start at £600. I think it's the cheapest reputable one I've seen. You can get them cheaper off of eBay. But have one installed for you starts at £600, and I've seen it go up to 4 figures.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. Anthony, I think this question's for you. What was the funding you mentioned before, the Household Support Fund? That was during the case study.
I think in the case study, I think that there's grants called, well, there was something called the Home Upgrade Grant that's going to be replaced by the Warm Homes Local Grant. I also said I think there's Eco4, so that's money that we don't see, but basically we facilitate it. So if an installer comes in, upgrades a property, then they will claim that from the energy company that's paying them for the carbon saved. So it's a complicated way of trying to tackle fuel poverty. But it does work, such as things like loft insulation, cavity wall insulation, new heating systems, upgrading existing heating systems. Sometimes, as well, as I said, I did refer to the Household Support Fund, where there we can fix boilers and fix our heating systems that are broken. And that's particularly important because a lot of government grants won't support new fossil fuel systems or repairing fossil fuel systems. But pragmatically, if you want to improve the health of a resident, the quickest way is sometimes to fix the gas boiler or the oil boiler and get it running again, and not rip out all that system and all that disruption. So sometimes we have to be pragmatic about it, about what we're trying to achieve. And then there have been other grants in the past as well from government, but I think we're just waiting to see what's happening with the latest round. But those are the sort of key programs and grants that we use And if you're in the social sector, sorry, there's something called the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund that I think is going to be replaced with Warm Home Social Housing or something like that. But there are certainly lots of grants available. Whether it's enough to deal with the issue is another question, but certainly the grants are available, and we do as much as we can to sort of facilitate those and get those to our residents to improve their homes and their landlords to improve their homes.
Thanks, Anthony. So next question, we considered installing PIV systems to our student house in multiple occupation, but HMO regulations require self-closing fire doors, which restricts the air circulation within the property. Please advise what is best to do in this situation.
I would say this is where you probably need a specialist input, a purpose-designed ventilation system. There are ways you could potentially achieve it through humidistat-controlled vents within the rooms, depending on the sizes and what amenities there are on there. But I think it's a complex property with multiple occupiers. You would need some specialist input.
So there's another question with regard to the prices of PIV. Say for a 4-bedroom house, are we talking like £800 or £5,000? I have no idea, just looking for a rough idea.
Really no idea. It depends on the layout of the house and how much work there will be. Sorry.
Okay. So again,
Yeah,
it goes back to. Oh,
I was
sorry,
just going to
Keith.
say that I don't think it'll be anywhere near £5,000. The 600 mark to 800 mark for the fan to be installed would probably be the same sort of cost for generally any size of property, really, because it is only the one device that's fitted into the loft space. So it doesn't need multiple units. It is just the one unit to be installed. So I think that price would be sort of the area to be looking at. Certainly not 5,000 anyway.
Thanks, Keith. So just back to the question about reliable unbiased damp specialists. Anthony, you'd already mentioned trusted traders.
I suggested
Martin,
that. Yeah. So trading standards have a list of contractors which can be accessed to give people assurance that at least their work has been done to a good standard in the past.
Okay, thank you. Is a PIV system the same as a mechanical heat recovery system?
No, it's not. A mechanical ventilation heat recovery system is different. It has a sort of network of pipes throughout your house and different vents. And as Keith was just saying, the PIV is really just one vent. But obviously with the heat recovery system, you are not just expelling air from the house, you're recirculating it and you're capturing the warmth from the warm damp air that's usually expelled can be recycled. And those are more expensive. Those are more like £5,000 or £6,000, but they can be considered to be part of your heating system as well. So they are good systems, but it's much more expensive.
Okay. For windows with moisture vents, is it advisable to clean the filters? How and how often?
You probably need to check with the manufacturers to find out whether or not these can actually be taken apart. Sometimes they just clip in, so you might be able to take them out, but you shouldn't really need to clean them that often unless the windows are very old.
Okay. Is white vinegar good for cleaning?
Yes, basically it is an fungicidal, so yes, it will help cleaning.
Okay, with your case study example, was that an issue with the house or was the tenant not heating the house properly, as there had previously been no problems when it was holiday let? Anthony?
It was neither. It's I suppose it's the fact that you are using it 12 months a year. So if you use it in the summer, and I'm generalising here, generally summers are warmer and drier. That's generally what happens. And you've got a regular turnover of people coming in every week or every sort of few days. You've got more chance to keep the property in a sort of use that you don't see damp and mold. Whereas if you're using it 12 months a year and you're using it during the winter when things tend to be more humid, colder, drier, like windier, like we've had recently, then in general terms that tends to increase damp and mold in the property unless you tackle the things such as insulation. Yes, you should be heating it properly, but if it's not insulated and all the heat's disappearing out the window and you can't afford to run it to the levels required, then that's going to cause an issue. But with all these things, the Ombudsman into the social housing, that's saying it's not the tenant's fault anymore. It's not the tenant's issue, which is perhaps what happened in the past. It is now the responsibility of the tenant and the landlord to actually fix the issue and resolve it. You know, if you want to live in a decent house that's safe, warm and dry and provided for you, then you should expect it not to have damp and mould in it.
Okay. What support is available to owner occupiers?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, because I think in terms of owner occupiers, then, as I said, we've just finished a home upgrade grant programme. And then there's a new one coming called Warm Homes Local Grant, but there's also things called the Boiler Upgrade Scheme that I think the government have recently extended. So that's looking at help in terms of new renewable heating systems, whereas I think it gives about up to 50% towards the cost of a new renewable heating system. As I said, there is Eco4, Energy Company Obligation 4. There's also something called the Great British Insulation Scheme that is matched with, or can be done separately with, Eco4. And I think the other ways we would look at it would be the tenant makes the landlord eligible for private rented homes. There are some constraints on private rented homes with some programs, but Eco4 is generally a much easier route, subject to actually making sure you've got an installer that you can rely on and does the work to a sufficient standard. So I think those are the main programs for owner occupiers that I think we're aware of.
Thanks, Anthony. What is the risk of damp and mould in holiday lets / short stays? Does a short stay of 5 to 10 days cause medical issues?
So it's hard to tell, isn't it? It depends what, you know, I suppose if you went into a property for a short stay and you already had really severe asthma and respiratory issues, and you went, say you'd stayed there last week, or you stayed in the middle of summer when the mist is down, and it's a very sort of, you know, sort of poorly there's less air circulating, and you think, oh, I'll put the wood burner on because it's a bit damp today, then you're probably going to make your issues worse, is what's going to happen. If you went there and had no health issues whatsoever, then you're probably able to withstand it. But if it's one of those things, it would build up over time. So it's hard to know.
Okay, another question. Any advice on insulation? Is this best avoided in terms of breathability / airflow?
I would say that insulation is probably more important than the risks that you would get by installing it. Obviously, if you're talking internal wall insulation, you're going to need to think about vapor barriers, but if it's just loft insulation, then I would highly recommend that is done. The important thing is that if a property can hold or retain the heat within it, then condensation problems are less likely. So I would always err to get insulation installed rather than consider that you might get problems from it. As long as there's good ventilation, then you should be able to keep any condensation problems reduced.
What about insulation for walls? Does that have an impact?
Yeah, it kind of depends on what you're going to be doing, whether you're doing external insulation, internal, or even just cavity fill. I'm always a bit wary about cavity fill, filling cavities, but in many cases it can work. There are some properties where you wouldn't want to fill a cavity, i.e. if there's already a damp problem in the property. External or internal, there's pros and cons with each one. Certainly for being able to do it easily, external insulation can be done more easily, but internal insulation can offer the best ability to get a warmer air temperature inside. Probably best to speak to the individual contractors to find out what they would suggest is best for your type of property, because the type of property will make a difference as to which type of insulation you have.
Thanks, Keith. My ground floor flat has a grainy, salty looking mould. Have tried different anti-mould, has not worked. Who is a specialist of thick Cornish walls buildings?
Yeah, not sure on who the specialist would be. Go on, Martin. If you,
I was going to suggest someone from the conservation team who will be familiar with appropriate actions to undertake in older listed buildings. So works that would be sympathetic to the character and and also address the issue of damp and mould forming, as well as specialists available through trading standards, I would say.
Yeah. Would it be possible to collate these questions and answers in a document? And I think what we can offer is, yes, we can produce a small FAQ, frequently asked question sheet, that based on a lot of these questions, and send it out with the links. We can put it in the description. Where the video sits on YouTube, it'll be in the description bit. We can put an FAQ document there to access. So Rupert, please can the chat be saved and shared with attendees? Again, we'll capture a lot of this in our frequently asked questions document that we can produce after this. So there's a question about, I must have missed, why no bleach? Ruth, could you just clarify that?
Yeah, bleach is basically a solution of an ammonia salt, and salts, as they dry, will then start to absorb moisture, which will become mould. It does take time. It's not going to be sort of something that happens. You'll probably get a few months of mould free, but then the mould will come back and you're just repeating this process over and over again.
Thank you. So there's a question about how reliable are the PIV systems and how easily accessible are replacement parts, but that might be a question towards Mark, a ventilation specialist. Wondering if that question was answered already. Has anyone got an answer to that? So how reliable are the systems and how easily accessible are replacement parts?
The larger suppliers, and I hate to mention one, but there is environmental, there's Southwest Kerno suppliers. They are very easy to get supplies. And as long as you go up there and clean regularly, so it's not going to be blocked up with dust, they last quite a long time.
Thank you. And do they need to be serviced?
Some do. I would say yes.
Okay.
This is a motor after all, so yeah.
One unit, I thought a diffuser on the landing was also required.
Some can.
If a landlord installs any of these suggestions, is the cost offset able against rental income, or is it a capital expense? Would it help EPC scoring?
I really don't know. I suspect it may be a capital expense, but speak to your accountant on that. And no, it's not likely to affect your EPC.
Nicole, did you have anything to add?
It's not going to improve your EPC score. If anything, it might lower it slightly just because you're adding air into the property, but it's not going to improve it.
Okay, what's the main barrier to a more widespread rolling upgrade in social housing to the building fabric, for example, internal wall insulation and external wall insulation?
I think that's the fundamental issue. I think there's not enough grants around. I can't necessarily speak on behalf of Cornwall Housing, but I am aware that generally our rents are lower, and rents have been capped for a long time in terms of increasing rents, generally in the social housing sector, which means their capacity to raise money against their housing stock has been more restrictive. So I think they've been caught on both sides of keeping rents low, but then can't raise rents to invest in their stock at the same time. So it's a very delicate area, I think. But fundamentally, there's just a lack of grant generally to upgrade, whether it's private housing or social housing, if we want to get anywhere near tackling damp and mould and our climate targets. That's probably the polite way. That's the neutral way of answering the question.
Yeah. Would a wood burner affect air quality inside a property, or is it more of an issue affecting air quality outside?
I think I partly answered that one in the sense of it depends if your chimney's been swept regularly. So are you servicing your wood burn? It depends what wood you're burning on that system as well. So, if you're burning the sort of Burn Better accredited wood and clean having your chimney swept every year, then you're probably reasonably all right. But if you're lobbing on, you've got your free pallets, or you've got a load of waste wood or something covered in plastic or paint, and you're burning that, then those things are going to affect your indoor air pollution as well as the outdoor air pollution. So I think it's not an easy one to answer, but we are aware, certainly in urban environments, then air pollution is increasing because it's trendy to have a nice wood burner and that lovely warm cozy fire looking in your room. But if you're not ventilating it and it's not getting ventilated naturally, then it's causing other issues then. So there's probably no one easy answer.
Thanks, Anthony. What is the contact for trading standards to ask about old buildings with mould?
It'll be on the Cornwall Council website. We can post a link in the
we can do
document
that.
We produce. Yeah.
Okay, there's just a comment to say I have a tenant who received Eco4 energy improvement earlier in January, and it's very very happy with the significant cost savings. Why did Keith say cavity wall insulation was not a good idea?
Yeah, cavities, of course, were originally built to stop dampness getting from the outside to the in. Filling that cavity, in some instances, it can cause a bridge across. The material they use obviously doesn't allow that capillary action of moisture coming across. But if you've got defective cavity ties, or as I said before, there's already a damp problem, so maybe dampness is already traveling from outside in, then filling the cavity can make that problem worse. As I say, in the vast majority of problems, not a problem, but I have come across the odd property where they did fill the cavities and there was a damp problem affecting internally. And of course, then what you need to do then is remove the material, and that can be quite complicated. So for the majority of problems, not a problem. The installer that comes out should check that your property is okay for it. So they should check to see if there's any damp problems, and if there isn't, then you're okay to go ahead with that.
Thanks, Keith. Is there a conservation team department at the council?
Within the planning service, yes.
Yeah, I think it's in the chat there. Someone's responded, haven't they? HEP
Okay.
at cornwall.gov.uk, I think.
Thanks, Anthony. How long should you keep windows open each day to ventilate without losing heat?
Yeah, I would suggest in the morning. Usually an hour or two is enough. I wouldn't recommend keeping the windows open all day, because that can lower the internal air temperature, keep it cold inside. A warm air will always hold more moisture. As soon as the air temperature drops, condensation then starts to form. The idea of proper ventilation is just to get rid of that excess moisture, not to necessarily keep the property vented all day, unless you can adequately heat it.
Thanks, Keith. I'm just conscious of the time, so we've got time for a few more questions. We get PIVs installed as much as possible in our tenanted properties, but one landlord refused and said it was too expensive to run. Any guides on running costs?
Depends what version they've got. If they've got the flat version, this is one that you would install in a flat because there's no loft space. The air is actually heated, so there is a heating element inside it. There will be an extra cost to that, but if it's a system that's taking air from the loft, they're usually not heated, and the running cost of that, I would think, is quite small. But check the wattage to see what the device is using, and that will inform you about whether or not it's going to be costing a lot.
We considered installing PIV systems to our student HMOs, but HMO regulations require self-closing fire doors, which restricts the air circulation within the property. Please advise what is best to do in this situation.
I think we answered that one, Laura.
Okay.
I think. Yeah.
The only other thing I would say is that check with the manufacturers, because you don't need large gaps around doors for this air to move. It will just find natural spaces, even a gap under the door. So there's always some kind of a gap. Certainly with HMO regulations, you have to ensure that holes aren't drilled through fire resisting walls and things like that. You may need fire proofing collars to go on pipes and things like that. So not quite so easy with HMOs, but check with the manufacturers, I would say.
Thank you. Martin, over to you. Those are the questions done.
Okay, great. Well, I would just like to thank everybody again today for attending. I hope you found it useful. Thank Ruth for delivering the presentation. Really just to make you aware that the next CRLS, the Cornwall Responsible Landlord Scheme newsletter, will go out and capture some more information around dampness and mould growth and the progression of the Renters' Rights Bill as it heads towards royal assent. So there'll be more information around this issue to follow.
Thanks, everyone.